Happy holidays from Lit Sports Online. We got your favorite mixed martial arts segment back and your favorite analyst, Pat. And we're going to be talking about a recap for UFC Fight Night Lee versus Iaquinta 2. So why don't we start with one of the, the undercard bouts here of Jim Miller versus Charles Oliveira. And this is one that ended in round 1 by submission. What's your take?
It was much quicker than I thought it would be. Jim Miller is kind of your typical super kind of gritty guy. He's high pressure, likes to move forward, likes to just throw bombs and just get into kind of reckless exchanges. And he actually had fought Oliveira years before, and I think he won by heel hook. And so I was really curious to see how the rematch was going to go. And Charles Oliveira pulled out a rear naked choke in 80-something seconds, and became the fighter with the most submissions in UFC history, passing one of the Gracies, I believe, Royce Gracie. And it was just a great performance from Oliveira. Is another step in the right direction. I know he wants to go back down to 145. He thinks that 155 he's a little outsized, and he thinks he can make the weight cut to 145, and he's going to have a better time getting to the title shot at the weight class lower. But even if he does go back down the weight class and instead of staying at 155, it's still a step in the right direction. It's a win over a big-name guy. He got to avenge a loss early in his career, and he put his name in the record books, which is always a nice cherry on top.
A very decisive round 1 victory for that one. And then moving on, we got Aron Font and Sergio Pettis were matched up in a bantamweight bout. And that was one that ended by a decision in round 3. So what's your analysis on that fight?
So it didn't go as I kind of thought it would. I thought Aron Font would kind of be going for the bigger shot the whole time, looking for the knockout. He's been on kind of a little tear where he's been getting a lot of finishes in the striking realm and putting guys away with punches. And Sergio Pettis is typically kind of a quicker fighter. He's really good striking, good footwork, good submission game, but he doesn't use it so much. He likes to kind of control the range of striking and kind of pick people apart. And we saw Aron Font do to him what he normally does to other people. Aron Font was just the bigger guy. Sergio Pettis is coming back up in weight. He didn't want to cut to 125 flyweight anymore, and so he went back up to 135 and thought it would be better for him. But we found out that there's probably a reason he went down to 125 to begin with. He gave up so much reach to Aron Font that he couldn't really handle it. Aron Font was just able to consistently land the jab, consistently keep Sergio outside of that jab, and not let Sergio in to actually land any big shots of his own. And one of the things that I think contributed to the fact that Sergio wasn't actually able to get in on Aron Font is he didn't have a lot of head movement. He just kind of kept his head on the center line the whole time, and it was just kind of easy to figure out where he was going to be based on what he was doing. He wasn't slipping punches. He wasn't rolling with punches. He wasn't weaving at all. And so Aron Font just had a real easy time finding him with the jab for the most part and landing some other shots as well. He also didn't really feint or do any sort of fake out to Aron Font. So one of the things that you'll see guys do when they have a reach disadvantage is you'll see them throw feints and stuff to get the other guy to bite on something and kind of open himself by reacting to something that they weren't going to do in the first place. Because you throw the feint and then it's easier to throw a shot afterwards, whereas you throw the shot, you have to recover and get your center back. But if you throw a feint and the guy bites and kind of leans one way, you might be able to take advantage of that opening and get in to land your own shot, whereas you wouldn't be able to if he didn't open himself up because he just has that reach on you. And so I think that Pettis, a little more head movement, some more feints, could do a little better against these bigger guys. And we've seen him do well in this division before, so it's not outside of the realm of possibilities. But it was a great performance by Aron Font, and I'm excited to see where he goes from here. He's headed towards the top of the division in an exciting weight class, and hopefully he has an action-packed and exciting future ahead of him.
Moving on to a lightweight bout of Edson Barboza versus Dan Hooker. Now here was a good old-fashioned knockout in the 3rd round, and was this one particularly close, or how would you say this one went? At least those first couple rounds before the knockout happened.
It wasn't pretty.
So it wasn't close.
It was pretty from one perspective. was not pretty from a different perspective. It was a clinic on how to effectively use kicks. Edson Barboza has the best kicks in the game. He kicks faster and harder than anyone. And he proved in this fight against Dan Hooker exactly how useful that can be. He annihilated Dan Hooker's legs with low kicks. He repeatedly landed body kicks. The one thing I saw him do less of that he typically does is go upstairs for the head kick a lot more. And we didn't see him do that, which I was kind of expecting him to, because he has such a crazy highlight reel of head kick knockouts. And Dan Hooker particularly was standing with his hands very low. He's a kickboxer from Australia, and so his striking is very good, but he's more of a puncher than a kicker. And he holds his hands kind of precariously low for my liking. And we saw him do that in the Edson Barboza fight, and that's why I was surprised that Barboza didn't go for the high kick more often, because when the guy's standing with his hands low, it's just less reaction time to get your arms up and block the kick and all that. And he was trying to slip stuff rather than block stuff, granted, but still, the arms low is usually a good bait.
Well, I thought that was rule 1 of fighting, is to keep your hands up so you can block, or is that not always the case?
It is to an extent. It's also, people drop their hands as bait. They drop their hands and they'll lean forward and put their chin out. We've seen Conor McGregor just put his hands behind his back and, grasp them together. And we saw Iaquinta do that in the main event at the end of the round. At the end of the fight, he dropped his hands and just kind of walked straight forward and just slipped punches from Kevin Lee. And so I think that's part of Dan Hooker's strategy, is he keeps his hands low. People come in to try to land the punches that they think they're about to land because he doesn't have his hands up. And he is able to counter-strike and land big shots of his own and finish fights that way. And it's worked for him in the past. Didn't work for him against Barboza, who's just too fast. He chopped up Dan Hooker's legs, took away most of his movement, landed a bunch of big body shots, kind of slowed him down, gassed him out. Dan Hooker was just beaten by the time the third round came around, and then Edson Barboza landed a gnarly spinning back kick that just landed right on Dan Hooker's liver. And he immediately, you saw his face just completely distorted, and it was a brutal kick to land. And then, there was kind of a flurry where Edson Barboza was trying to put pressure on him, and then Dan Hooker looked like he was coming back a little bit, and then Barboza just kept putting the pressure on and eventually landed one more body shot to the exact same spot, and it was just too much for Hooker, and he just collapsed onto the canvas, turtled up, and the ref called the fight off.
A knockout from a body shot, huh?
Yeah, they're uncommon unless you're Edson Barboza. There's a couple guys who just have crazy spinning back kicks. Edson Barboza and Dennis Seaver are the first two that come to mind. Who just land these hard body shots and put people out. We've seen Luke Rockhold get a finish by body kick, a couple other guys, and it's always almost more brutal because it's not that the guy is incapable consciously of responding. It's that he gets hit so hard in the body that his body just goes, I don't care what your head is saying, we are done.
The only thing I can think of more impressive than that is knocking some dude out with a leg kick or something.
Barboza's done that as well. He's one of the only 2 or 3 people. I think it's the only 2 I can think of off the top of my head are Barboza and Jose Aldo, and they're the only 2 people I know that have just kicked somebody in the legs so much that they called the fight off.
So that brings us to our main event for Fight Night. Kevin Lee, Al Iaquinta, and it was a lightweight bout that went to decision in round 5. So, just going off the numbers, that sounds like a relatively close, interesting fight, but how exactly did it break down?
It was a pretty close fight. There were some people who scored it 3 rounds to 2, some people scored it 4 rounds to 1. Everybody had it for Iaquinta. I remember watching it and thinking that Kevin Lee won the fight, but I think that was mainly based on the fact that Kevin Lee got some takedowns and was able to kind of chew up some time, even though he wasn't super, productive from that position. He had Iaquinta in what looked to be kind of a close to choke out a couple times, but Iaquinta's just submission defense was off the charts that night. It looked like Kevin Lee had the hook sunk in a couple times, and Iaquinta was just able to power his way out of it. And I listened to interviews with him afterwards. He says he was never in any real danger. He trains with better black belts than Kevin Lee all the time. That's kind of the typical stuff that a fighter will say. But Yeah, it wasn't a blowout, I didn't think. But I think that Iaquinta definitely won. He controlled most of the striking game. His head movement was great. His timing was great. I really think that what won him the fight was two different things. I think it was his cardio, because he just did not slow down at all. The entire fight, he was just pushing forward, pushing the pace, making Kevin Lee back up, which we typically don't see from Kevin Lee. He's kind of a pressure fighter. He likes to wrestle people. We don't see him being the one backing up so much. Like his last fight was against Edson Barboza, who we just talked about, and his whole game plan was just move forward and keep Edson Barboza on the back foot so he can't plant and throw those power shots. We saw Iaquinta do to Kevin Lee what he does to other people typically. And so it's an interesting dynamic to see. And I think part of that comes from what I think is the second thing that won Iaquinta the fight, was just his composure and like the pressure that he kept on. Just his mindset the whole time. He didn't get flustered when he got taken down. He stayed completely calm. He got out of every position. And I think that what happened was just Kevin Lee being unsuccessful in landing the strikes, and every time he took Al down, Al getting back up relatively quickly, Al fighting off every submission, just everything that Kevin Lee tried to do was unsuccessful. And Iaquinta just stayed in that same mindset, that same coming forward mode, that I think that just the pressure and the will that Iaquinta put on Kevin Lee just kind of broke him mentally. And I think that the Kevin Lee just wasn't able to adjust during the fight. He wasn't able to adjust at all. And we saw Iaquinta, get in a couple bad spots, and he was able to compensate for what was happening and go a different route. When certain shots weren't landing, when he was getting caught with one punch, he started cutting a different angle and all sorts of stuff. But Kevin Lee, just when his game plan and what he thought was going to work didn't work, he didn't really have a response for it.
But it's fights like this that are like really close to go to the scorecards that make me wonder like how the judges are scoring these kind of fights. Like how much of it is subjective versus objectively just, okay, he landed this many punches, he got taken down this many times, and how much is like the feel of the round, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and a lot of it is subjective, and that's the tricky part about scoring in both MMA and with boxing is you really don't know how each individual judge is going to look at something and how they're going to score the fight. They're supposed to score in MMA based off of, I think it's effectiveness, octagon control, aggression, and one other thing. I can't remember what the exact 4 criteria are, but they all kind of do different things differently. And some judges will look at any time a guy takes another guy down and is in top position, that's him winning that fight or that moment, even though he could just be sitting there doing nothing and the guy on the bottom is throwing punches and advancing position to get out. They see it as just because the guy got a takedown, he's controlling and like owning that moment, where that's not necessarily the case. And so you never know what's really going to happen. And so that's why when it was going to the judges' scorecards, I wasn't quite sure who was going to win. And Kevin Lee himself was in disbelief, said he was speechless after the fight. And it's a tricky business, and we see a lot of terrible decisions that end up hurting guys' careers, which is unfortunate. And there's a lot of people who've been speaking out for a long time about how we need to reform not only the judging, but the entire scoring system as a whole. A lot of people don't like it, and they just took the scoring system from boxing because it's the closest sport we had, and so it doesn't necessarily work for MMA with just how many different variables there are as compared to boxing. So yeah, it is very, very subjective, especially considering that they're sitting ringside. They can hear the announcers, they can hear the crowd, so they're not like deprived of the input of other people. They could be sitting here and hearing the announcer 12 feet away talking, who may or may not be biased towards one guy, and just take what they're saying into account, or take the crowd cheering into account, or something like that. Whereas they should, what really they should be doing is watching it kind of isolated and just watching what's happening and developing their own opinion about it.
Okay, interesting. But so that was the card. That was all the matches. And any upcoming events we should make people aware of?
Yeah. John Jones is coming back. December 29th, UFC 233, 4, 2, one of those three, somewhere in there, 230 something, not sure. It's going to be a good fight. Him versus Gustafsson. Co-main event is Cyborg versus Amanda Nunes. 2 title fights, 1 card, ending the year with a big blast. It's going to be fun.
Okay, well that does it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Whether you're watching on LitTube.com or on YouTube, we appreciate your viewership. Go ahead and make some comments. We always like to get our fans' input as to what you want to see on our program. So go ahead and leave a comment and make sure to subscribe and keep looking at the website. Thanks, guys. With your favorite analyst, Pat. And we're going to talk about UFC Fight Night, Iaquinta versus... Shit, I forgot who it was. Cut!
It's LaQuinta! Not Iaquinta!
Iaquinta.
It is Iaquinta?
Yes.
What the fuck? I thought it was named LaQuinta, like LaQuinta, like it's the fucking hotel.
Yeah, that was the joke that I made. You took
I took it dead ass fucking serious.
Well,
Oh fuck.
I thought it was Quinte.
fucking joke.
Oh, I thought it was I didn't realize it was
Let's take that from the top.
What's your name, Toby?
Your name is Toby. I believe the fighter's name is Toby.